Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Thursday, July 30th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Today is National Whistleblower Day, and we've got a special show for you. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, whistleblowers are essential to enforcement, and government increasingly wants them to come forward. One recent case shows just how serious that effort has become. Plus, encouraging people to speak up is one challenge, but protecting them afterward is another, especially when they work for government contractors. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. National Whistleblower Day offers a chance to look at why whistleblower protections remain a bipartisan priority. From financial crime to artificial intelligence, policymakers increasingly depend on insiders to identify problems that regulators may never see from the outside. To help us put that evolution in context, I'm joined by Stephen Cohn, chairman of the board of the National Whistleblower Center. Stephen, it is great to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Great. Thank you so much.
I think you are perfectly suited there at the National Whistleblower Center on National Whistleblower Day to kind of reset our memories and take us back to the beginning. How did the recognition of National Whistleblower Day start, and what does it commemorate?
Sure. So back in 2010, I was researching for my book, The Whistleblower's Handbook, a resolution that the Continental Congress had passed, that we had dug up for a brief. We were looking for authority, found this old resolution that no one had ever focused on. And it specifically said, it's the duty of every inhabitant of the United States to report all frauds and crimes to the appropriate authorities as soon as possible. And they passed that on July 30, 1778. That's why July 30th is National Whistleblower Day. So once we dug that up, I then had my law clerks and we all went crazy trying to figure out why did they pass this? There had to be a reason. And then what we discovered was that in 1777, February, about 6 months after Declaration of Independence, 10 sailors and Marines signed petitions aboard a frigate, the Warren in Providence Harbor, attacking the commander of the U.S. Navy and saying he tortured British prisoners, he was enriching himself, he was greedy, he was a bad guy. They selected one of their number to jump ship and present the petitions to the Congress, travel, without permission and present the petitions. One thing that's of significance, and I just want to read this, is these are working class people. This is coming from the grassroots. This isn't like the George Washington and Samuel Adams. These are the people on the ground fighting against the British. And here's what they wrote. They said that this commander possessed the most dangerous principles conceivable. And what were the principle that they were attacking? And here it is, that he declares that all mankind are exactly alike, and that no man ever existed who could not be brought with money, who could not be hired with money or do any action whatsoever for money. They viewed him as a greed-driven person, not like them who were fighting for liberty. This is what was on the ground. So this guy jumps ship, goes to the Continental Congress without permission. They listen to what he has to say, and they suspend and then fire the commander of the Navy. Well, the commander's not very happy. So he files a criminal libel suit against the whistleblowers. He's able to capture 2 of them in Providence, has them thrown into jail under criminal libel. And these 2 write a letter back to the U.S. Continental Congress, 1778. Now, their letter could have been written by whistleblowers today. And here's what they wrote. First, they said they're persons who are not affluent, and whistleblowers are generally not the rich and famous. Then they said this. They said that they believe it was their duty to blow the whistle, to report this. And then they report that they're held to bail without connections and without the ability to defend themselves, which most whistleblowers find themselves in this position. Against, and these are their words, a powerful, artful person with the advantages of his offices and the great wealth he's amassed. And they plead for help. And then Congress on July 30th passes America's first, and maybe the world's first, whistleblower law. It is the duty of every inhabitant to report frauds and misconduct to the appropriate authorities. And then they go the next step. They release all the petitions. No FOIA. And these petitions are embarrassing to the U.S. government. They're talking about torture of prisoners. They release them all. And then they go one step further. They allocate money to hire lawyers for the 2 imprisoned whistleblowers. And it turned out they paid $1,400 back then. Think of that. They needed money for bullets and guns. They were facing treason charges themselves. The Continental government had almost no resources. But they allocate $1,400. And they get a great lawyer for these guys. They win their case. And that is the tradition of whistleblowing in America that has been buried. And that's why National Whistleblower Day exists, to bring this history back.
Stephen Cohen is the chair of the board of the National Whistleblower Center. It sounds almost like the more things change, the more they stay the same. We still have the same issues today. When our audience hears whistleblowers, though, they're probably thinking about a federal employee reporting problems inside the agency. Is that where you see the bulk of activity now, or is it shifting into corporate cases and fraud and finance and other places?
Well, people want to do the right thing. And if they have the ability to safely and confidentially report, they will. So federal whistleblower rights lag behind. They're terrible. You'll hear from other guests. We're trying to fight and restore them. But in the private sector, they've really enhanced them. Anonymous, confidential filing, the ability to get significant financial awards, strong anti-retaliation, the right to go to federal court. So the impact of private sector whistleblowing has converted whistleblowers to the number one tool for law enforcement to uncover white-collar crime. When we look at the different areas, for example, False Claims Act, the oldest law guaranteeing confidentiality, but more important, financial awards mandatory. 75% of all frauds against the government are coming directly from whistleblowers. Because they pay the whistleblowers an award, they quantify their impact, and we now know for the first time that this incentivization of whistleblowing has completely altered the landscape and has made the detection and successful prosecution of well-hidden white-collar crimes possible. And as Mr. Devine and others will tell you, this needs to happen with federal employees also.
One of the legislative priorities that the National Whistleblower Center is advancing is the AI Whistleblower Protection Act. What's different about AI that requires special whistleblower protection?
We represented the OpenAI whistleblowers about 18 months ago who came forward with the right to warn letter. These were about 24. We represented 8 of them who had the courage, without any known protections, to step forward and to warn the American public of the dangers of AI, potential dangers. They were all within the companies. They were all pretty much would support AI, but they knew of the risks. From that incident, it became absolutely clear that you need an AI whistleblower bill, a law to protect insiders, corporate employees within that industry. There's no protections right now. In the United States, there's no one whistleblower law. We have gone piecemeal for 50 years. We have one law for occupational safety, one for environment, one for food inspection, one for corporate employees, one for government fraud. So that's how it's happened in the United States. So we're just repeating what we have done for the past 45 years. We've identified a sector of the economy that is absolutely needs whistleblower protection. The risks are way too high. They're in the newspapers. The risks are way too high. So there's a bipartisan bill, Grassley, Hawley on one side, Klobuchar, Coons on the other side, and we need this bill to pass immediately. The risks are too high.
When you think forward, would you advocate for a consolidated, uniform approach to whistleblowing, or is this sector-by-sector approach the smartest way to go?
When I started in whistleblower law in '84, I definitely wanted a uniform law and urged it. But now what we've discovered is that this piecemeal approach, because we have a lot of them, like 70 laws, is probably the best because we're able to align each law to the law enforcement offices that would have jurisdiction to prosecute or regulate the industries. So it really makes sense on an SEC case to go to the commission, to a money laundering case to go to FinCEN, etc. So the piecemeal approach, I think, ultimately aids in law enforcement. The downside is that many whistleblowers don't understand how these laws work and essentially screw it up. So we are fighting with the agencies and are often in court trying to get them to understand that a whistleblower may file in the wrong office. These laws are very confusing. And so that's what needs to happen. If anything's going to happen, there should be a law that essentially requires integration and cooperation with all the existing laws.
And today on National Whistleblower Day, what is your message to those out there who think they may have a story?
Whistleblowers have made an absolutely incredible contribution to American democracy, to accountability, to making this country great. And that needs to be acknowledged from the day the founders of this country unanimously understood this. And just so you know, this wasn't just a little thing. The whistleblowers went to the prosecutor of the prosecutor who prosecuted the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre and got him to support them. Samuel Adams was one of their biggest advocates. It's in the record of the Continental Congress that he was one of their biggest advocates. The leaders, the founders of this country understood the importance of people, working people, common people, stepping forward to ensure that there's equal justice, that the laws are followed, and that greed does not contaminate the government of the United States.
Stephen Cohn is the chair of the board for the National Whistleblower Center. Stephen, thank you so much for getting our day started. These are great stories and great information.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Up next, whistleblowers are essential to enforcement, and government increasingly wants them to come forward. One recent case shows just how serious that effort has become. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Whistleblower protections are only one part of the government's strategy. Agencies are also experimenting with financial incentives designed to encourage insiders to report misconduct before it spreads. A recent Justice Department case produced the first ever antitrust whistleblower reward. To discuss what that may signal, I talked with Ann O'Brien, partner at Shepherd and co-leader of the firm's Antitrust and Competition Practice Group. Ann, it is lovely to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me back.
Just kind of describe for me the shift in DOJ's posture over the last few years to really make whistleblower encouragement such an important part of their enforcement approach.
Yes, they are really focusing in the Department of Justice Antitrust Division on this whistleblower program. That is an evolution. I think for a long time in the Antitrust Division, when I was there as a prosecutor, there was the focus on the Antitrust Division's leniency program, self-disclosure program, as really a primary source for tips and leads. And there was a lot of discussion for years in the Department of Justice Antitrust Division about whether paying whistleblowers rather than relying on companies and individuals to come in and self-report was a good idea or not. And those who were not for it pointed out things like when someone is paid, they can be cross-examined on trial on that payment. You're a paid informant, and there's downsides to that. But I think we're at a point now where the Antitrust Division has seen leniency applications, self-disclosures dwindle a little bit, and they're looking for other tools. So, like we talked about in July, here comes the Whistleblower Rewards Program, and it's a program announced in July between the Antitrust Division and the U.S. Postal Service. And what they want to do is pay out antitrust whistleblowers who have evidence of antitrust crimes like bid rigging, price fixing, market allocation. They want to incentivize people, and it can just be regular people who have seen this type of conduct or those involved, to come in and to report it to the Antitrust Division. And that's a tip and a source and lead for them to then go investigate and prosecute.
Well, at the end of January, they announced their first award under this program. What struck you as significant about this big announcement and this first award?
Yes, and when I was here back in July, I was skeptical about the program's memorandum of understanding that really was a little complex, as you pointed out, and had a lot of nuance to it and a lot of discretion. So I had a lot of unanswered questions about how quickly, how much money would be paid out, and the nexus to the Postal Service. So on January 29th, 2026, the DOJ's Antitrust Division and the Postal Service provided affirmative answers to a lot of my questions by announcing the first whistleblower reward. It was $1 million reward. It's a pretty significant amount of money to the whistleblower who provided information that led to a company, eBlock, to resolve criminal antitrust bid rigging and wire fraud charges through what they call a deferred prosecution agreement. And under that agreement, they agreed to pay $3.28 million criminal fine. And what they would do is pay that fine, and the whistleblower, they announced, was getting just $1 million, which is almost a third of that. So eBlock is a company that offers online car auction platforms, and so this was about bid rigging on those platforms. So why is this significant? I think three ways, and this really answers the questions I had. It was speedy, the amount was significant, and the underlying nexus was not too postally. I know that's not really a word, but let me explain what that means. On the speedy front, when I was here in July, I was skeptical that we'd see an actual payout of an award in under a year, but they beat it. In less than 7 months, the DOJ and the Postal went from rollout to payout, which is quick. I mean, as a 20-year Department of Justice veteran, I will tell you, in government years, that's light speed, right? I mean, things moved fast. So it's faster than we see in other whistleblower context, in the FCA, False Claims Act context, or other whistleblowers. It's fast. So the program did pay out quickly. The second is the whistleblower reward is significant. And it's not just $1 million being significant, because to an individual, we all know that is a large award. If you win it on a game show or if you're given it by the government, it's a lot. By all accounts, that's a big number. It's impressive, from an outsider's point of view, that the department so quickly paid out that amount. But it's not just the raw number. It's really, if you look at the math, because when I was here before, we talked about that the DOJ and the Postal Service, under the Memorandum of Understanding, said they would pay out 15 to 30% of the penalty. And they used an example where they laid out 20% payout. This is almost 30%. So the top end of that. Maybe they wanted to make a splash for the first person, I don't know. But I will say it's by all accounts significant, both math as a percentage of the penalty paid by the company, which is here a deferred prosecution, not a criminal prosecution and sentencing after trial, but it is almost 30% of that. So very significant, very fast. And then the third thing is, I had this question, and many of us did, about how much are they going to require that there is a nexus to the Postal Service. So you asked me about that, and I used an example of if the Postal Service is a direct victim. So contracts for water, for instance, that the Postal Service, workers are drinking when it was hot here in July, But this isn't that. The nexus is very thin, quite frankly, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because it says that they're ready to pay out these amounts, and it's really the discretion that was the question. And now we see that the Postal Service and the Antitrust Division are implementing the program and using their discretion towards paying it out. And I think that's significant and will incentivize people to think about reporting.
I'm speaking with Ann O'Brien. She's a partner at Shepherd and co-leader of the firm's Antitrust and Competition Practice Group. And there's a quote in the press release that announced this award that I want to get your reaction to. And it says, "Remember, the first company in an antitrust cartel that reports its collusion to the Antitrust Division might receive leniency, but the race is faster now because employees and their attorneys are incentivized to blow the whistle and beat their companies to the division's doorstep." What does that sound like to you?
Well, it's a good quote. And I think keeping the race on, I can see why they said it. It's well said in that part. As a longtime antitrust lawyer, there's a different part that jumps out to me, and that's the word might. And the reason that jumps out is because they say, if you're the first company in an antitrust cartel that reports its collusion to the Antitrust Division, you might receive leniency. But the race is faster now, and it goes on. The reason that might is significant is that there is this tension, as I said at the top of this portion, there is this tension between self-reporting, leniency companies or individuals coming in to self-report without a payment, and incentivizing people to come in and report through the whistleblower program. And the Antitrust Division has been very clear that both can coexist, right? But this jumps out to me because I think it's a signaling of, we now have another source of information. And you, companies, are in a race with your own employees. You're in a race with potentially people at other companies that are going to come in and report. And if they report before you, maybe you don't get leniency. And there has been a trend and a tipping of this self-reporting leniency program, which has been wildly successful part of the Antitrust Division's criminal enforcement program, to be a little reticent, a little less likely to automatically give antitrust leniency when they didn't know of an offense before like they were. And I think there's a little signal of that. There's always been an individual leniency program since the early days of leniency. There was corporate leniency first and individual. So an employee could always come in and report. That race always existed in the leniency context. Now the difference is there's money tied to it. So they're focusing on that. So it's a different vehicle to get tips. And I think they're just like the Antitrust Division always did when I was there, saying this is a race to the prosecutor's door. This is adding a different aspect to the race. The race was always beat out your co-conspirator companies. If you're at a conspiratorial price-fixing meeting and one of your co-conspirators is an empty seat at the table, maybe they went in and reported. So you better be worried that they are, and talk to your lawyers, your in-house counsel, your compliance folks, and see if you should run in and report. If an individual potentially that worked for you complained about, hey, is this right what we're doing? You'd get nervous that maybe they'd run in and report. Now this is a different aspect. It just enhances that race because you might have a person that comes in. And the way they came out quickly with a large award, it does make it part of the discussion.
Do you think this splashy award is a way to kind of open the floodgates? Are we going to see a lot more of these? What do you think will be next from the DOJ and the Postal Service that will build on this first case?
Well, they certainly want to send that message, not just that quote in the press release that you said, but I've heard this week the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division, the person who said the quote that you just read, he's saying that there's a frenzy of applications from whistleblowers. This was very quick how it came about. There is questions in the antitrust bar about whether the antitrust division is proactively reaching out to whistleblowers, maybe with False Claims Act complaints or securities or other types of whistleblowers, and saying, hey, do you know about antitrust stuff too? Is this there? Proactively doing that. There's nothing wrong with them doing that. But I think they want to create this idea that there is frenzy. And I mean, I'm not questioning it. They're saying it. There's a lot of applications. So I think they want people to think there is all of these coming on the pike. So if you have an inkling of some conduct that we might find to be a criminal antitrust violation, rush in and report it. This is a good first step for them, saying this is real, this is quick, it's a significant amount. There's not a deep nexus to the Postal Service. So they're doing all the things. But I still think the proof is still in the cases that they're able to bring based on whistleblower complaints. This is a deferred prosecution agreement. So a company agreed to pay an amount. A deferred prosecution agreement is thought to be lesser than a criminal plea agreement. It goes away after the 1-year period that's in this agreement if they do everything that they're bound to do by that agreement, the company. So this is a first step, but can they make and prove cases beyond a reasonable doubt relying on a whistleblower? That remains to be seen.
So if you're an employee out there and you're thinking, I may have seen something, I may have some inside information that could be a benefit, might be reward worthy, what should they be thinking about?
Well, as I thought would happen when I was here in July, I do think that there is a lot of clamoring of lawyers to provide that service. If you went Googling whistleblower, or maybe now you're using a AI bot, but you are looking at, I have information on antitrust, I want to blow the whistle, I'm sure you'd get a plethora of advertisements for lawyers that would be happy to help you and likely take a cut of that. So that development of that bar, like we've seen in the False Claims Act context, like we've seen in securities whistleblower context, that's happening. That's happened. They're out there looking for people. They're advertising, so people would look that up. They could go directly to the Antitrust Division, and I think the Antitrust Division wants to promote access from individuals, and there's a website that lays out what to do. People need to be realistic that the reward, like any reward, comes with a lot of requirements. They will have to cooperate. They will have to spend probably more time than they like working with agents and reviewing documents. And that reward is not guaranteed. There's a lot of discretion. There's a lot of exclusions to the program. So at the end of the day, will they get paid? Still, there's a lot of discretion to be had. It's not a guaranteed award just because you rush in.
And can people who work for the government or the Postal Service get an award under this program?
Unfortunately, no. There are exclusions that say that people are ineligible for an award if they're an official, employee, or contractor of the DOJ, the Postal Service, or any law enforcement agency. And their relatives also can't get it. So if they are doing their job and they see this type of conduct, sometimes we saw procurement officials, law enforcement, Office of Inspector General, they're doing their job. They shouldn't expect to get award or reward under this program. I think the idea is you do your job. That's what you're there to do. So no, they're not going to be able to get it. I'm sorry to tell your listeners.
I've been speaking with Ann O'Brien. She's a partner at Shepherd and co-leader of the firm's Antitrust and Competition Practice Group. Ann, thank you so much for breaking this down for us. It's really interesting to follow up the memo we talked about in July with this first case. Thanks for joining me. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, good intentions, incentives, and legal protections only matter if employees know where to turn when they uncover a problem. On National Whistleblower Day, we examine the protections, risks, and realities of reporting wrongdoing inside the government. But first, encouraging people to speak up is one challenge. Protecting them afterward is another, especially when they work for government contractors. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Whether whistleblower programs succeed often depends on what happens after a disclosure is made. Congress is now considering changes aimed at strengthening protections for contractor employees who report wrongdoing tied to federal work. Joining me to discuss those proposals is Tom Devine, Legal Director of the Government Accountability Project. Tom, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Today is National Whistleblower Day, and we usually think about that with a focus on federal employees. You are making a case that federal contractors should also be protected here. What is happening, or where are the inequalities between how federal employees are treated and how the contracting workforce is treated?
I think the most significant thing is that depending on the year, there's between 2 and 3 times more federal contractors who are spending taxpayer funds than civil service employees. And that's gone up sharply with over $4 trillion in new spending since the pandemic and the climate change bill, most of which is going to contractors rather than to federal civil service employees to implement. So it's always been kind of a under the radar, but more significant aspect of government accountability than the conventional civil service system. Federal contractors have one whole level stronger rights than government civil service employees do, because they have access to court and can seek justice from a jury of the citizens whom they're purporting to defend when they risk their professional lives. Civil service employees have to go to administrative judges who don't have any political independence. They've never had very much. They've always at least had the appearance of some sort of independence. Now the civil service merit system enforcement is explicitly an at-will scenario. It means they can be hired or fired at will with any or no reason. And that means that basically federal employees have the same level of rights as people in a political spoils system, completely vulnerable to patronage at this stage. And they don't really have any enforceable rights under the Whistleblower Protection Act. They're still there on paper, but there's no credible enforcement. Contractor employees are a level higher. If they don't get relief from the agency inspector general, where the spending was connected, they can go to court and have a jury trial to seek justice. And that's a significant improvement. But despite that, both laws are dysfunctional. The federal civil service law is absolutely hopeless at this point. It's basically an honor system for any of the merit system principles that are in the law. There's just no independent enforcement. And for the contractor law, it was a breakthrough pioneer law when it was first passed in 2012. But any remedial law that's seeking to challenge abuses of power by the power structure, power system, is going to require regular maintenance. There's an inevitable, relentless, basically unrestrained counterattack against the rights that are used to neutralize abuses of power. And that's happened with the government contractor bill. At this point, although it's got an impressive structure, just due to all the loopholes that have been carved out in it, it's almost irrelevant. And even the impressive structure has suffered some deep wounds. So we're just very encouraged that a bipartisan mandate in Congress for whistleblower protection has emerged in the context of government contractors. We decided that it was necessary to try and upgrade those laws when all the new spending came in with the pandemic. We thought, well, this is going to create an unprecedented challenge for accountability.
Tom Devine is the legal director for the Government Accountability Program. So, Tom, you talk about the new laws that have been introduced. Both the House and the Senate have unanimously approved contractor whistleblower reforms, but there are some differences across those bills. What are the key points that you're watching here?
The key points are where there's unanimous agreement to help the whistleblowers more effectively. And that's a really an exciting development. After the Ukraine impeachment hearings, whistleblower protection became a partisan issue, with President Trump opposing all the whistleblowers, saying one of them should have been hung, the one who sparked the hearings on the Ukraine. And what we've seen is an evolution with the contractor whistleblower rights bill. Initially, there was just only Democratic support for it. Jackie Spear in the House and Kamala Harris in the Senate. And there are no Republicans who are connected with it. Then it shifted to Elizabeth Warren being the champion for it in the Senate, but no Republicans in favor. That changed last Congress when we got unanimous support in the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee in the Senate to pass the same legislation that had been a partisan impasse beforehand. And it was blocked on the Senate floor because of a holdover intelligence community protections. The Senate Intelligence Committee didn't accept that provision. This Congress, we not only got a unanimous vote again in the Senate committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee accepted the intelligence community contractor shield, and it passed the whole Senate unanimously. And last week, the legislation passed the House unanimously, but it carved out the intelligence community protections. And so that distinction will have to be resolved. But what there's unanimous mandate for by both chambers in Congress is protecting not only employees, but the government contractors themselves. If they're pressured by the government to do the wrong thing or to retaliate against their own employees who are blowing the whistle, it's going to be protecting international contracts, not just domestic ones, as under the current law. It'll protect the refusal to violate the law. So whistleblowers can walk the talk and not just make noise. It restores court access in some parts of the country where the courts have created a loophole and said that all you have is protection from an inspector general. We generally don't have the time for whistleblower protection. And if that doesn't work, you can go back to the company and ask them to change their minds. And so that pretty much canceled out any enforcement for the contractor law. Well, this legislation would overturn that. The legislation would empower the Office of Inspector General at an agency to seek prosecution of government officials who sought to have contractors bully the whistleblowers within their ranks. This would basically create America's strongest whistleblower law for all government contractors except potentially intelligence community. There's a unanimous mandate for the rest of federal spending outside of the civil service, and we're rolling up our sleeves to see if we can cover the intelligence folks too.
The intelligence community seems like a big issue here. How optimistic are you about being able to resolve it so that they're included in both and not excluded in both?
I think that the intelligence community challenges are a lot broader than just covering contractors. The rights are really indefensibly weak for government employees in the intelligence community. And our hope is that there can be a comprehensive reform effort for the intelligence community that's parallel to the more conventional aspects of the federal labor force and the contractor labor force. So we'd like to get that on a separate track and consolidate all of the breakthrough improvements in rights that there is a unanimous mandate for.
Moving this kind of legislation really does require organizations like yours to play the long game. You've made tremendous progress here, but this Congress is running out of time. Do you think that they may get this passed before they have to install a new Congress at the beginning of the year?
They really should get it passed when there's so much support for something that could make so much difference for the taxpayers. Like over 200 organizations, including the National Taxpayers Union, the Taxpayer Protection Alliance, all the good government groups have united in their support of this legislation. And when you can make that much difference for reforms that are no longer politically controversial, it would be a real shame to wait. But if they do reach an impasse over the IC, the intelligence provisions, we're not going to stop. We'll roll up our sleeves and get started right again in January after the midterms. And you're right, it is a marathon struggle to get free speech rights. The last version of the Civil Service Whistleblower Protection Act, the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, took us 13 years to pass. And we were so close, it was like, the Odyssey, where you're almost reaching the promised land and then blown back into sea numerous times. But we're not going to back off, and I know we're going to achieve this.
Tom Devine is the legal director for the Government Accountability Program. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, good intentions, incentives, and legal protections only matter if employees know where to turn when they uncover a problem. On National Whistleblower Day, we examine the protections, risks, and realities of reporting wrongdoing inside the government. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Throughout this National Whistleblower Day special, we've been discussing why disclosures matter and how government encourages them. The final piece is understanding how the federal whistleblower system works in practice. For that perspective, I'm joined by Charles Baldus of the Office of Special Counsel. Mr. Baldus, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back, and happy National Whistleblower Day.
Absolutely. National Whistleblower Day gives us a chance to kind of reflect on the role that whistleblowers play in government. As you sit in the Office of Special Counsel now and look back over your tenure, what do you think the big lessons are for how this administration and the government more broadly is treating and interested in the input from whistleblowers?
Well, I think they've been a lot more responsive than some people would have anticipated. We've had some excellent closures in some cases where various agencies have taken corrective action on whistleblower disclosures that needed corrective action. And I think there has been a recognition that whistleblowers are a critical safeguard. They help ensure agencies remain responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. Over the last year, the Office of Special Counsel in particular has worked with numerous whistleblowers to uncover waste and deliver significant corrective actions and cost savings across the federal government.
One of the things that you all have put out is a relatively new resource called the Public Files webpage. Tell us a little bit about what that is, why you set it up, and what you're doing with it.
Well, once a disclosure matter is closed, redacted versions of the referral letter, the agency report, the whistleblower's comments, and our determination are posted on our public files page at osc.gov/cases. This fulfills the statutory transparency requirement while protecting the whistleblower's identity and any sensitive information. We don't publicize matters mid-investigation. The public files resource lets the public and Congress see the results of the process without compromising confidentiality or due process. It reinforces that the system is open and accountable.
What do you want federal employees to find out as they look at that information?
We want them to find out that OSC is a safe, independent, and confidential channel, that federal employees or former employees or applicants can disclose information they reasonably believe evidences any of the 6 categories, meaning number 1, a violation of any law, rule, or regulation, number 2, gross mismanagement, number 3, a gross waste of funds, number 4, an abuse of authority, number 5, a substantial and specific danger to public health or safety, or number 6, censorship related to scientific research or analysis. And I think federal employees can look at our public files and see some of our cases as examples of the types of whistleblower disclosures that are really meritorious that they can also be on the lookout for.
And as you and your office look across the files, are there any trends that you noticed over the past few months? Any particular areas that are getting a lot of attention?
Well, OSC's caseload and outcomes have remained steady in the sense that we continue to meet our statutory deadlines and deliver strong results. But in terms of the types of the disclosures that we receive that meet the statutory threshold, I would say those have actually been fairly consistent. The vast majority are nonpartisan. The Department of Veterans Affairs continues to lead the pack. They generate the largest share of cases, which is understandable given its size and public-facing mission. The VA has the most employees of any federal agency outside of the military, after all. And that's why we've also put in place a streamlined system of monthly status calls with the VA to keep those matters moving. Across agencies, we see a broad range of disclosures: aviation safety, veterans health, environmental compliance, and pure waste of taxpayer funds. I think the consistent lesson is that when employees trust the process, they are able to surface problems that lead to meaningful reforms.
Charles Baldus is Chief Counsel of the Office of Special Counsel. So, Mr. Baldus, let's just think about what folks are seeing there. For someone who might be considering a disclosure, what separates a complaint that gets traction from one that's harder to investigate?
Well, a complaint that gets traction is, first of all, I think we do have to distinguish between disclosures and complaints, which are disclosures are when a whistleblower has a matter that fits into one of those 6 categories: a violation of law, gross mismanagement, and so forth. And a complaint is what we refer to as a complaint brought under a prohibited personnel practice matter, so whistleblower retaliation. And in that case, a whistleblower disclosure has already been made or is believed to have been made, and the agency has taken inappropriate personnel action in response to that. With regard to disclosures, which is, I believe, what you're asking about, typically it's going to be one where we have enough to say, okay, this is real. This isn't just speculation. This isn't just fear. There's something concrete that we can look to, a concrete expenditure that just doesn't make any sense, a concrete violation of law that we can point to when we have the specific law in front of us, or someone taking an action that there's clear evidence of that goes beyond the authority of the agency, or there's some sort of conflict or other wrongdoing involved with the action that's been taken. But I think that it's fairly intuitive once you start looking at some of the cases that we've seen. And I'm happy to give a couple of examples here if you'd like.
Please do.
So for one thing, we do regularly put out press releases covering some of our most significant disclosures of cases, so people can go to our website and see that, osc.gov, and click on the press releases tab. One of the most significant cases we've closed this year comes from the FAA. It really is a textbook public safety disclosure. An FAA medical officer reported that understaffing in the Office of Aerospace Medicine had created dangerous backlogs. There weren't enough medical officers to check pilots and air traffic controllers' health paperwork. So when something looks off on a medical form, like a possible health issue, the review sits in a long backlog. And because of the wait, hundreds of pilots kept flying with certificates that might not have been fully cleared. Some people stopped reporting illnesses, injuries, or new medicines because they didn't want to be grounded by a delay. And new air traffic controllers had to wait longer for medical approval, which slowed down hiring and left fewer people controlling the skies. And the FAA's investigation confirmed this problem. They ended up hiring 26 additional medical officers, which was a 40% increase. And they put new efficiency measures in place. This was a real example of where public safety was being threatened. A whistleblower came forward and the agency responded and fixed the problem. And I think it's a great example that people can look to for the type of disclosure that makes it all the way.
That's very helpful. And you also mentioned how important it is that whistleblowers trust the process. What are you doing there to help in that arena?
Well, we try to handle every whistleblower case with respect, with confidentiality, and to treat them as well as we can treat them, and taking their complaints or disclosures into consideration. Our attorneys are well trained in evaluating cases, and we will never betray a whistleblower. And I don't think that there's ever been a case where we could even be accused of that. And so I think that all we can do to increase trust is to do our job as well as possible. And we also have another component of our operations under 5 U.S.C. 2302C for certification purposes, where we train agencies. And this is where we can help get the word out and encourage federal employees to look to us as an option to come and communicate with us about disclosures that they may think merit consideration.
That FAA case is such a clear example. If a federal employee thinks that they have uncovered a waste, fraud, or abuse case like that, what practical advice would you give them before they bring the disclosure?
Well, it's always helpful to put together whatever evidence that you can to make the case as well as possible before you bring it to us. But even if you bring it to us directly when it's not fully baked, our attorneys are trained to help to evaluate and encourage whistleblowers to go back and collect more information that they may be able to use to put together a substantial likelihood finding. And so I would say the most important thing is to just assess what you have and to see if it's worth bringing in the first place. If you want to put together evidence before that and then bring it to us, great. If you want to go ahead and bring it to us, we'll try to work with you on that. But even if we end up turning a case down, if you think, well, I can do better, you can come back. We don't turn anyone away who's been here before.
And when you think about all the cases that are in the public disclosure file these days, are there particular issues that have the most kinds of disclosures? The FAA case seemed to be a staffing case. Are you seeing more staffing issues or contracting issues or financing issues? Where do you think the preponderance of the disclosures are?
There isn't really a single area that sees a preponderance of the disclosures. There's always allegations of funding matters that can involve a gross waste of funding. Some of those make it all the way, some of them don't. That tends to be discretionary in many respects. Whether or not something is an abuse of authority, for example, is sometimes a matter for interpretation. So there might be less that we can do in those cases. But I mean, on the staffing side of I would say that's a regular concern, sometimes with overstaffing, sometimes with understaffing. And just to give another example of an overstaffing situation, we had received a disclosure from HHS's Office of Medicare Hearing and Appeals about wasting taxpayer resources because in 2019, this office had substantially expanded its workforce and geographic footprint to address an unprecedented surge in appeals cases between 2012 and 2015. So that surge was addressed by 2022 or 2023, but the staffing level was maintained at the surge levels over the next several years, really until 2025. And now, as an appeals body, the Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals can look and see over the next several years what their workload is going to look like because they can see the current docket. So they don't need to maintain surge capacity. They know it's coming. And a whistleblower had come to us and disclosed what was going on there. There were about 150 extra employees on the payroll that weren't really needed for the work. So it totaled about $30 million in waste over 2 years. HHS confirmed the findings. They fixed the problem. They used reassignments. They put workers in other places. They used attrition, but they fixed the problem thanks to what the whistleblower was able to bring forward. And so that's a fairly typical type of case as well, along with the understaffing side of things.
The pushing the public case files out has been one effort that your office has made toward transparency, but that, as we've talked in the past, that's been a key focus of you and your team. What new initiatives do you have coming up?
Well, as far as new initiatives right now, I can talk about a previous one that we had put in place that I think has seen positive results. Last year, we initiated a new policy for completed whistleblower disclosures that are highly meritorious. Maybe they saved the government a lot of money, or they prevented some serious harm from occurring, or identified a very serious violation of law. OSC will now recommend to agencies that they use their statutory authority to provide monetary rewards to those whistleblowers. And of course, this is just a recommendation. Agencies can do what they want, but hopefully it puts a little pressure on them and maybe encourages whistleblowers to think, well, there might be something to be gained by this as well. That's one of the things we put in place. Beyond that, I would say at this time, what we are trying to do is simply to evaluate disclosures that are brought to us as precisely as possible and to try to make good recommendations to produce good results for the government and for the American people.
Charles Baldus is the Chief Counsel for the Office of Special Counsel. Mr. Baldus, I really appreciate you joining me today. And as we said at the beginning, happy National Whistleblower Day.
And to you. Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.